No, I'm trying to poison you. Hello everyone and welcome to Framework. I'm your host Cameron Thorpe, and every month we will dive into and discuss a single frame from a film in cinematic history. We'll also feature filmmakers on our show to get a different perspective on how we consume media content today. If you enjoy film and television and want to dive into imagery, please subscribe to RCE Podcasts on YouTube and look for our show. In the first episode, we will look at an image from the 2019 film directed by Todd Phillips, Joker. Once again, I'm your host, Cameron. Come take a gander one frame at a time.
Sounds awesome. Cam, your voice is so good for podcasts.
maybe
it's like ASMR.
It's like ASMR.
It really is.
Yeah, I'd be good. I could record ASMR.
You'd be very good. You just have this very nice cadence.
Smooth cadence.
I just feel so welcomed with your voice.
Oh, that's
it just wraps around me.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that, maybe one day if my film career doesn't work out, I could just record ASMR. Like Red Curtain Entertainment ASMR. How's that sound, Kevin, for a show?
That's nice.
Is that viral material?
Sounds great.
That sounds good to me.
Sounds good.
All righty, here we go. Hey, everyone. I'm Cameron, and right here with the pilot episode of Framework, a podcast and YouTube show about how single frames in popular films speak to the rest of the film as a whole, as one big picture. What do images mean to you? Let's discuss. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Cameron. I'm a writer-producer from Toronto, Ontario that focuses on short form and series content. I have produced 4 award-winning short films, and I'm currently developing 3 feature screenplays. I like film because I believe it is the closest thing to real magic. But enough about me. Let me introduce our guest for today, Robin Johnston. Hey, Robin.
Hey, Cameron. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this pilot episode.
Yeah, of course. Welcome to the show. It is just the pilot episode, of course, as you heard me doing my intro script there. So there's a couple of kinks that obviously we're gonna work out, but let's just dive right in, have a nice conversation about Joker. So this episode's called A Lesson in Happiness, featuring Robin Johnston. Robin is a 23-year-old cinematographer born and raised in Brantford, Ontario, having spent much of his early life speaking exclusively in film quotes. It was inevitable that he would find his way into the industry. Are you in the industry, Robin?
I see you're pulling my bio from my website that I haven't updated since second year of film school. So I'm really glad that we have something up to date that really represents me.
Dude, you sent me this.
I know I did. And that was my own mistake. That was on my own mistake. Yeah, I
am about to ask you who you are.
That's okay. Do you want to ask me who I am?
Yeah, I would love to. Robin, I can only do you so much justice. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and then we'll kind of transition that right into Joker.
Absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, I'm a friend of Cameron Thorpe's. That's the top of my resume. That's the first thing I tell people. I know Cameron Thorpe. And the second thing is that I'm on the pilot episode of Framework.
Okay, hold on. If you actually told everybody that you met that you knew Cameron Thorpe, I'd get more jobs. Anyways, don't let me cut you off.
No, so a little bit about me. I'm a graduate of Sheridan College's Bachelor of Film and Television program. I graduated with specializations in directing and cinematography. One of those specializations I use, and one of them I've totally thrown out because directing is not for me. I'm as you said, a 23-year-old cinematographer, and I mostly do non-union, like music videos, promos, commercials, and short films as well. So, most recently, luckily we had the opportunity to work on a film together that you wrote, and I got to be the cinematographer for. Run, boy, run.
Yeah, and you know what, Robin, they talk about I listen to a lot of podcasts about, sort of directors talking about cinematographers that they use, but I don't really like the word use, like I feel like you and I have a very collaborative relationship, and you and I, even though you're not a director, we could talk about the direction for certain scripts and stories and things like that, and then just sort of bring them to life because you're much more like I am a visual thinker, and I go to images a lot to get inspirations for my writing. But I think you and I work really well together, and like you said, we did work on something just recently. Before I get into like the film intro and talking about Joker, and put a marker here, Kevin, because we might put this at the end. But could the audience find your demo reel anywhere? Where would they look for that?
Yeah. So you can find my demo reel on Vimeo. I'll send you guys the link. And then any of my other work predominantly gets posted onto my Instagram. I don't really do much other social media. So it's just robin.johnston.dp on Instagram.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I guess Instagram would be, since it is a visual platform and it's kind of taking over Facebook in a lot of ways, that would be the primary place to kind of reach out to you and check out your work.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's sort of the main hub of everything I do. It's on Instagram.
Yeah, cool. All right, let's just jump right in here and talk about Joker. That's obviously the 2019 film is directed by Todd Phillips. Can you believe it's the same dude who did The Hangover, right? Let's just let that sink in for a little bit, okay? The movie, and I'm gonna ask for your help here, but the movie follows Arthur Fleck, who's played by Joaquin. No, wait, hold on. I didn't say that right. Joaquin Phoenix, a failed comedian who wants nothing but to bring laughter and joy to people's lives. He's a man in multiple masks, but still finds himself having negative thoughts, isolated from the world around him. With the unwanted help of his friends at his place of work, Fleck begins a slow and painful transformation into the well-known character, Joker. Do you think that kind of almost does it justice? You can never do this film justice with just one paragraph.
It's tough. But, I mean, that's a very beautiful summary. I think that captures as much as you'd want to capture in it without just seeing the film. The film is definitely something to behold, and watching it is a totally different experience than just reading about it. But I think you did an excellent job.
Yeah. All right. So I'm just going to take some time here, maybe a minute or two, to talk about, for the audience's sake, exactly what we do, what we're going to do in this podcast. Since it is the pilot episode, the first episode, I just want to kind of break down what a general show would be like really quickly. So the show is obviously called Framework, and really what Framework is all about is images and how they speak to the film as a whole. So we're talking about single frames, shots pulled out of scenes, and we look at them, we talk about them, we discuss how they relate to the movie that we took it from, how they relate to life in general. We can talk about cinematography techniques in terms of the craft and how it relates to our guest's craft. In this case, we are featuring a cinematographer, but not every single episode of Framework will feature a cinematographer. Sometimes there'll be writers, directors, producers, production designers, and we just talk about images because that is how we tell story in film. Story is told through images in sequence. And obviously, I'm not going to take any credit away from writers because I am a writer, but that is where we build the story, and then we bring that story to life with pictures and thus the motion picture. So, but Framework talks about the image as a still image as well as how it relates to the images around it, and that's Framework. Okay, so that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna dive into film. We're gonna have a conversation. It's gonna be very discussion based. And Robin, I'm gonna put you on the spot here because you have to bring your expertise, because you're a cinematographer in this case, and I think it's very fitting to speak to you about cinematography.
It's a lot of pressure. I'm excited though.
Yeah, I'm glad you're excited. Before we jump in, I'm just going to say we are in the Red Curtain Entertainment Studios recording this podcast. Kevin Reus is our engineer. and technician. Hey, Kevin.
Oh, I'm an engineer, right?
Yes. Well, you're a lot of things, but in this case, you're our
Today.
engineer today.
Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Glad to be here. Robin, I need you to help us introduce this image. What are we looking at today?
Yeah, so I guess for people just listening who aren't able to see the frame, what we're looking at is honestly one of my favorite frames out of this whole film. You know, when you came to me with the idea for framework, I was super fascinated by trying to capture the essence of or I should say, trying to capture the entire visual language of a film in a single frame. That was how you pitched it to me, and to me, this frame says a lot about what the rest of the film is going to look like. So, I mean, what we're looking at is early on in the film. This is Arthur Fleck, Joaquin Phoenix, reaching the top of that daunting staircase that we kind of return to over and over again in the film. And there's so much headroom. You know, we're basically looking towards the stairs as he comes up, and the world is bearing down on him. You have all these buildings behind him, all cast in blue, and just at the top of the frame, we have this small little street light of sort of sickly yellow that's kind of drawing him up the stairs. And all the while, even though he's so isolated and tiny in this frame, it's crazy how busy it can feel too. How someone can feel so alone, but also completely claustrophobically surrounded.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And just so everybody knows at home too, we're kind of doing this over Discord, so I can see the stream as well. So we're going to be both looking at the same image at the same time. But yeah, that was a great introduction. I think it's also helpful for the audience who's only listening to note that this happens at the beginning of the film. We see this image near the beginning of the film, which is interesting because the film is notably regarded as a descent into madness film. Similar films like Taxi Driver, of course, that we can note from the 70s, that I think this film harks back to in a lot of different very evident scenes and sequences. But it's also good to note that this film is very much a character piece. Would you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the entire film, just like Taxi Driver, just like what is the other one? King of Comedy. You know, an intimate sort of examination of someone who is a little lost in the world. And I think this frame also very much speaks to that. On the other side of this frame, there are a few people that cross. So he's not fully alone throughout the shot, but I think that actually speaks to something else that's kind of part of the overall visual language, which I'd be happy to get into if you want to dive right in.
Yeah, let's absolutely feel free to dive right in for sure. I mean, we obviously have a format here, but we're gonna just be we're just gonna discuss it. I really just want to open up the conversation. Yeah, before you dive right into that visual language, it'd be interesting to talk about like where's the focus in this image, because does your eye go straight to Arthur? Like for you as a cinematographer, would you say, and you can obviously segue this into the visual language of the film, but would you say that your eye goes straight to Arthur?
Well, okay, so what's interesting about this frame, I kind of anticipated that you would ask me this. And I think it's important to note that just before Arthur reaches the point that he's at in this frame, there's actually only one light on in the building behind him, and it happens to be exactly where his head is right now. So there is that little bit of yellow that would draw your eye right as the frame begins.
Okay, right.
And as he enters, he starts to, he covers it up. So your eye's already been brought there, and he sort of douses that little bit of light. In the overall frame that we're just looking at right now, my eye immediately goes to this yellow street light at the top. And I think that's intentional. You know, clearly, it's funny that you call it a descent into madness when the first frame that we choose happens to be an ascent. but I think that those all play together in an interesting way because this ascent is like this constant, exhausting trip for him. I mean, you see like how hard this guy works to just live.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a huge part of this character piece, just seeing how tough it is to be this single person in this big, crazy, harsh and careless world. So to have him kind of rising up these, I've heard Lawrence Sher throw out the number like 160 steps or something to get up this staircase. I mean, that is like, he looks tired in this. And I think that's, supposed to come across. You're supposed to see how exhausted he is. And that little beacon at the top is almost like this relief in a way. And the yellow being the relief is a kind of interesting pattern that you start to see throughout the rest of the film, because the yellow is almost a mix of things. It's, to me anyways, the best way of describing it is the color that signals that Arthur is kind of going into a darker place. I mean, all the way up until the end of the film, like he has his yellow vest and it's almost him donning this kind of darker persona by putting that on. And the yellow becomes this bizarre, or has this bizarre dichotomy of being both his allowing himself to be absorbed by his own darkness, but also pulling him out of the darkness that is the rest of the city. And the rest of the city tends to be characterized in these blues,
Right.
Like these really, really saturated teal blues, which is another, huge part of this frame. You have these saturated teal hues of the city quite literally just fall, like it's like a waterfall, just flowing down on him, pushing him back down these stairs. As the shadows on the side of the frame kind of all lead you in this very beautiful kind of V right to him. It's, I don't know, I'm obsessed with this frame.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure we could talk about this frame for forever, and I mean, we can very well try. I think this lamp that is to the left of, or I guess to the right of Arthur, but to the screen left, from like a lighting perspective and a color perspective, it's pretty much like the only thing that kind of allows for a sense of contrast, because you see a lot of the yellow in there, and then like you're saying, all these blues. So imagine this shot if the light wasn't illuminated. You'd have a very different
blue and shadow.
Yeah, it'd be blue and shadow. Yeah, in this case, that's like one of the only yellow orange tones in the picture, in the image. Like there's a few in the distance, like in terms of color wise. I don't know exactly what those are, but there's some color that's not blue in the far in the background. But yeah, this lamp, and I mean the light obviously that's behind Arthur's head that we, like you said, we can't see. It's I think that was a very good point for you to make, because we have to think about, it's easy to talk about an image like just as it is, like this one, not moving, but at the end of the day, I mean, like the nature of film is that it's moving image, right? So it's very important to talk about what is behind Arthur and what you saw before, because this is one frame out of 24.
Exactly.
That occur over the course of 1 second. And, the camera could very well move in this frame as well, in this shot as well.
Exactly. So I don't think I fully answered your question, which was, where does your eye go? I mean, my eye goes to the lamp, but yeah, exactly as you said, when you are looking at just one frame, it's important to recognize that this is just one of 24 in 1 second. So there's plenty more information on either side of this to guide the way the audience is going to view it.
And we could pick, I don't know how you want to do this, but is there something that sort of pops out at you about, like it could be the lamp, or it could be Arthur, or it could be composition, or whatever that you think you want to talk about that's the most interesting about this image? I know you were like back a couple of minutes, you were trying to go into like obviously visual language, but is there anything that you think pops out at you about this image that makes it stand out amongst almost the entire film and sort of what it means for Arthur in this moment? Because I also want to talk about what it means for the story and sort of circle back into this ascent into madness or descent into madness. I mean, as you know, I've written a film review on this very film, and I prefer to call this film an ascent into madness. And part of the reason that I prefer to refer to this as an ascent into madness film rather than a descent into madness is literally just because of where he ends up. Like if you look at the ending of the film, we can talk about whether or not the character succeeds, but that's obviously less about cinematography, more about the script. But the cinematography obviously supports that and shows that. But if you look at the like one of the last frames of the film, he's literally ascending the crowds. He's above the crowds, right? He's not hidden within the frame. He is the focus of the frame. He is. I can't remember if he's center framed, but like, there's less. I don't know how to say this. There's more light on his face. There's more light on his face. There's like and that's sort of why this image almost, the motion in this image almost kind of, works with where he ends up in a way. And you see that a lot in film, in films and in television, sitcom, and other media as well. Like, just in terms of crafting a story, you want to echo in a way at the beginning of the film where the character is going to end up. And just by sheer motion alone, the fact that he's going up these stairs, it almost does that. This scene, this shot would be completely different if he was going down the stairs. His body, part of his body wouldn't be hidden. For example, the stairs creates a visual shield for the character. We can argue back and forth, obviously, what that means, but it does cover him partly, right? So this scene would be completely different if he was going down the stairs, just simply. But yeah, jump right into something that about this image that you think makes it stand out amongst the rest.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too far off of this frame, I just wanted to echo something that you had said about that last shot of him over the crowd. There's a really interesting element of that plays into this overall language, and it's tough to totally show this element of it in still frames, but that shot, when you contrast it with where he begins, like you said, it's you could argue back and forth about whether he gets to a better place, but visually there seems to be some element of accepting that he is maybe in a better place, because the very first shot of the film is bookended by that shot. The first shot of the film is that slow, methodical kind of dive into him as he's putting the makeup on in the mirror. Yeah. It's all steady cam, and it's immediately contrasted, that steady cam kind of push in by handheld as you sort of dive into his world further. But that slow push into the first shot is completely bookended by that slow pull out where you see him over the crowd, kind of basking in the awe and the sort of jubilation of everyone around him. So it is interesting that there's this huge sort of visual bookend that they threw in to kind of help visualize at least where he is in a personal kind of headspace, because so much of this film is about the journey that he goes internally, that he goes on internally versus everything that the audience sees. The film is so silent throughout because so much of what the journey is what's going on in his own head. So in terms of this frame, though, I mean, there's a lot of ways we could do it. I mean, we can go at it kind of systematically and start with one element of it and move through, because, you know, as I said, the reason I chose this frame is I think that this illustrates in a lot of way the overall language of the rest of the film. If I was to point out one thing that I think this does best, and the reason that I chose this over most other frames, really is the composition, because I think it gets at something that the film is always trying to communicate in any other, you know, way. It's not just the cinematography; it's also the set design, the locations. Everything kind of builds up to this idea that he is small, insignificant, feels isolated and alone, but has this busy, claustrophobic world bearing down on him. It's this kind of visual. This kind of visual style gets returned to in a lot of ways. Like in the doctor's office, for instance, when he's talking to the therapist, you know, he's surrounded by all of these books and all of her notes and boxes full of things overflowing. And even though he's this tiny little sort of trapped thing in the frame, this small little insignificant thing with all this headroom, he still feels like he's constantly surrounded by stuff. So it's just this bizarre back and forth of feeling small and alone, but also constantly filling the frame. And that's a hard line to sort of walk, to make someone feel like they're in an empty frame while completely filling it and surrounding them. Yeah. And I just think this film this frame in particular does an excellent job of that.
Yeah, I wanted so badly to disagree with you, because I know before this we were recording, we talked about sort of having a good discussion, and part of having a good discussion is coming at it with opposing views. I really wanted to disagree with you, but I was gonna say, like, the most striking thing about this frame and this shot too, in sequence in motion, is the composition. Mm-hmm. And how he's being, like, buried by space above him. Mm-hmm. And when we think about, like, as a writer myself, okay, when I think about internal conflicts, okay, it's hard to you know, it's hard to write a feature film and have it survive solely on the internal conflict. Obviously, there has to be some physical and emotional conflict. And it's really difficult to, like, make a film entirely inside somebody's head. Mm-hmm. And obviously, you know, Joker sprinkles in, you know, physical conflicts, because that's a big part of, like, why he's in the headspace that he's in. Like, just look at, like, one of the first confrontations, which is in the alleyway, where he gets beaten almost to death, and then this big, you know, title card comes up, and it's like that. Like, he's struggling, he's suffering in part because, you know, like, maybe he doesn't fit in, or you know, whatever's in his world. Like, people just seem to, like, kind of, like, pick on him and target him. But what I'm getting at is, a lot of the times when we think about claustrophobia, okay, and how we can visually show claustrophobia, at least in my own experience, like, I see tight shots, I see close-ups, I see, like, you know, like, taking, removing the space from the image and, like, cutting them off in weird places. And those are very valid ways of showing claustrophobia. Mm-hmm. This film does an excellent job at using, I guess we could call this a wide shot. I think we would call this kind of a wide, or a long shot. Yeah. You know, as a way of using wide shots and long shots to convey that same feeling, that claustrophobia. Mm-hmm. And these buildings behind him, even the buildings that are to the left and to the right of him, are burying him. And that is yes, in part, like, the choice of location and the design. Like, the thing in the bottom left of the frame here looks like a garbage bag. Mm-hmm. It's grimy. Like, these are all production design, location, cinematography, directorial choices that go into crafting this image. And yeah, that's my point, is that this film does an excellent job at using mediums and long shots to convey that claustrophobia in the same way that you could with tighter shots or tighter scenes, like locations, like in the bathroom, obviously, when he's dancing, which is like you said, a scene that's talked about almost overly discussed. But
well, and I think you hit on something really important there, which is kind of where our intuitions go when you're trying to communicate claustrophobia. I mean, I think one of the best sort of contemporary examples I can think of would be like the Safdie brothers and like Uncut Gems. Right. You know, a film like that, or even Good Time, a film like that really fights for the claustrophobia by cutting people completely out of the frame, or I shouldn't say cutting them out of the frame, but cutting everything else out of the frame, having, you know, almost the whole film on these long lenses that are right up close with people, and you're trapped in their perspective. And you do get a little bit of that in this film as you kind of transition into the handheld shots, where you kind of get to dive right into Arthur's own kind of wandering perspective. I mean, the best example I can think of is him sitting in the living room at night, holding the gun that he's given, and you just have the camera kind of wandering across its features and him, and it's this very sort of train of thought kind of way of visualizing what it is that he's thinking about. But what's really interesting about this frame, in contrast to how you would try and communicate claustrophobia, like the Safdie brothers, like an Uncut Gems, is exactly what you said, using these wide shots to bury a character visually. I mean, you know, I mentioned it earlier, but the waterfall thing is something I'd want to come back to, because you know, this frame very much, I mean, you could easily have these buildings on the left and right that are a little closer to him also sort of flooded with blue the same way everything else is, but this is, you know, clearly a very intentional choice to have those be black. And I think, you know, creating this waterfall effect is interesting, to have not only the blue bearing down on them, the pressure just pushing down on them just like a waterfall, but to have it be city, you know, have it be Gotham, have it be the buildings. I think it says a lot about where Arthur's at, feeling like the rest of this city, the rest of this world are pushing him down as he's pushing to get up. You know, he's coming up these stairs as the entire city pushes him back down. You know, it's claustrophobia, and I think the word that really jumped out to me was like agoraphobia, which are like people kind of associate with, you know, fear of open spaces, but it's more a fear of not being able to escape. And sometimes that means open spaces, but I think this communicates agoraphobia in a really creative way, because it doesn't feel like he could go anywhere other than where he's going. It feels like he's on rails in a way, but not in a robotic way, in the sense that he couldn't go anywhere. He couldn't go to the left because it's all darkness or it's all garbage. He can't go to the right. It's all darkness, it's all garbage. And behind him is just going right back down and sort of diving into that blue, dingy city that he's clearly trying to get away from.
I think the agoraphobia point is obviously a great one. I wanna talk a little bit about darkness and specifically blackness in terms of our dynamic range, like the details in the shadows versus the details in the highlights. This section to the right of the lamp, is any of that like absolute blackness, or is there detail all throughout?
I'm inclined to say that it's probably not absolute blackness. I think it probably gets very close to an absolute black level, but you know, I think all of that comes from the look with the colorist, obviously. I wish I could remember the colorist's name. I know it's Jill something for Joker, but I think it's close to absolute blackness.
Yeah, and you know what? That like you said is totally intentional. And then if we could, you could break this down into like a pixel. You could pixel peep all you want, but obviously we don't want to do that. But just the fact that like part of the wall is like perfectly lit, I wouldn't say perfectly lit, but illuminated, and part of the wall is dark and black. also says something, right? It's like we're contrasting light and dark, and that says a lot about the theme and the tone of the film as well. If we look at it feels like there's like contrast in areas of this image that are like rather close together. So for example, like if you look at Arthur's face, which is partly in shadow, and then right in front of him, which is the top of the stairs, there's a highlight there. Like there's detail and a highlight there, which almost looks like it's wet from like maybe rain or whatever. Which could very well have been like an accident on the part of the production. Like perhaps it rained hours before or days before they shot this. But there's also something to be said for like where the darkness is versus where the highlights are. Like of course there's going to be a highlight in the lamp because it's on. But if we look at his face, it's partly lit around his forehead, but his eyes are dark. You don't really see his eyes in this frame, at least. You might see them more, obviously, as he approaches the camera. I don't remember exactly every single detail. But it's important to note that like we're almost putting highlights on mundane areas of the scene. We're not putting highlights on his face. That's completely intentional. And you could just think from a cinematic point of view in terms of why they would choose to do that. But it's like with lighting. It's like, okay, why are you putting the light there? Now let me ask you something here because I don't know the answer. My gut says no. But are there any artificial light? Is there any artificial lighting? Is Larry Sher lighting the scene? Or are they just using what is practical?
I'm inclined to think that in terms of light fixtures, there probably isn't anything except for possible. I mean, obviously there's the lamp, which, either the glass is stained to be intentionally that yellow, or they've done something with the actual bulb that they chose to get that look, or maybe it's all just, in the coloring. I'd be inclined to say that there might be some sort of source, just a soft source up near where the camera would be situated. But I think that the effect that you're getting here in terms of all of these shadows contrasted with the light, with the blue light, is more than likely a giant frame, like a 20 by, or something even larger, essentially flagging off these buildings, and then allowing the light to fall on the buildings as it kind of falls back into the background.
Something that I think a general audience doesn't realize is that like we're breaking down the nitty gritty of this image, but these are all intentional choices. It's like, a lot of people, I think, well, I mean, and this is obviously like to no fault of their own, but like my parents, for example, when they watch a film, they don't like realize, and this is a good thing in part, but like they don't realize how much work kind of goes into like editing together the film, for example, or like the fact that every time the angle or like the perspective or like the view on the character, like, and I'm using layman's terms, but that's partly because my parents might listen to this. Every time the view on the character changes, that's a different angle, that's a different camera setup, that's a cut. But like they don't realize that sometimes they don't realize that there's a cut happening. Like somebody is intentionally changing the view, and smoothly, I might add, right? Like obviously like seamless editing, there's craft to seamless editing, just like there's craft to cinematography. It's like somebody and I don't want to sound like, I'm saying this to somebody who's stupid, but it's true. So people don't necessarily realize how things are done, but like somebody is making these decisions. These are cinematic, directorial, production design, locations related decisions. The content of this scene could have been filmed like anywhere else. Okay. But this is where it happened to be, and they probably, I mean, this is Joker. I mean, I don't know what the budget was, but they probably had enough money to say, okay, we want to film on this like staircase. So it's not like they're running and maybe they did. Maybe I'm totally wrong. But my point is they did these things like intentionally. Like there is somebody behind the camera saying, I am going to do this. And that is art.
Yeah, well, and it's funny. I'd be inclined to say that the fact that your parents or any audience in general, the fact that they don't pick up on these things, I think is less a comment on that audience and more a compliment to the filmmaker. Because if a general audience is watching a film and thinking about the cuts and thinking about all of these little elements, then chances are that it's because something's going wrong. And they're picking up on where something's gone wrong. Not to say that a general audience can't respect, the more artful cinematic side of things. And I think a film like Joker really speaks to that, because the people that enjoyed it were both, film critics and audiences alike. But I think that speaks more to the quality of the filmmaking than it does to the quality of audience perception. So if your parents don't notice the cuts, then something's going right.
No, and exactly, and that's like partly kind of where I was going. Where I was going with that is like they shouldn't be noticing it. It's one of those art forms that spends more time trying to hide things, right, than bring them to the forefront, right? And I mean, obviously we could talk about how that's not true, but it is very true in a lot of ways, and that's kind of partly what the editor's job is. But this is more obviously about the cinematography. So yeah, I think for me, I'm going to kind of bring us back on track because we've been going for 45 minutes here. But yeah, for me, and it seems like for you, the composition of this image is really the most striking aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the composition is the thing that I think is most powerful in this frame. To pick up on something that you had mentioned, briefly, the lamp light breaking up the wall. It's funny that I would have said in the beginning of this, the sort of point about subjectivism being frustrating in film, but I realize that I do project so much of my own subjective interpretation, because for all I know, Lawrence sure put that fixture there and went, you know what, I just want the color. I just want to sort of break up the dynamics, or I want to add a bit
dynamism to the image.
Yeah, exactly. But when I look at that light shining on the wall, I can't help but start to think, there's all this darkness surrounding him, and this yellow light happens to be the thing that's breaking up the darkness. What does that say about yellow in the rest of the film? Is there something about yellow that breaks up the darkness in Arthur's life? Is there something about it being at the top of these stairs that's pulling him up? Yeah. Is it the color? Is it the light? There's all of these things that we can interpret ourselves, but I guess that's kind of what makes this medium so interesting.
Exactly. Is that you and I can sit here and be like, oh, well, they thought about every single detail, because that's what it's like. It's like, well, sometimes they didn't kind of realize it, but there was a reason that they decided to include that into the frame, whether we're right or not. There was a reason. And so that is what you just said there is a good segue into two things. And while Kevin is pulling up the next frame, which I want to talk about because the two of them relate to each other. By the way, for everybody who's listening, it's kind of funny because Robin and I are usually on really close wavelengths. But we decided that we would each choose an image, and it turns out that the image that I chose comes right after this one, which is just a coincidence. So the next one, it's actually in my Finder, Kevin. I don't think we put it into the chat. While he's looking for that, this is a good opportunity for me to ask you a question. I have a question prepared for you that I know you thought about the answer because we talked about it last night on the phone. So basically the question goes like this: would you say that Larry Sher's work influences yours in terms of how you are crafting your own style?
It's interesting. I always watched, Todd Phillips and Lawrence Sher's work, but always from a perspective of not knowing it was them. So I remember, really enjoying the first Hangover. I always remember really enjoying Due Date. I saw these movies without realizing it was them, and was so blown away to come into Joker and then start to make that connection between the two of them. So it's tough. I would be inclined to say that Joker absolutely has some sort of influence on my style, or has had some influence on the way I like to think about composition and the way I like to think about the relation of, the camera to the character, and how, pulling a camera as close as you can get to a character as possible can create, a much more intimate feel for the audience. So I'd be inclined to say that Lawrence Sherr's work on Joker has absolutely shifted kind of the way I think about composition, the way I think about movement, the way I think about color. But I would be lying to say that his body of work has influenced me. And the reason I say that is because I've never been a person who's felt super comfortable shooting comedy. I commend Lawrence Sher for having done it for so long. And, having listened to him talk about this film, it seems like he's picked up a lot of really excellent lessons in sort of pacing the day, keeping up momentum, making sure the actors feel in the headspace. All of those kind of things are awesome lessons to carry into dramatic work. And I think that those lessons, pay off in the end with Joker. I think those kind of things show through. So I think in retrospect, I like to listen to the things he says about his own work and the workflow of it, and try and adapt those to my work too, because, I'm a person who, likes to light for a wide shot, and try and keep that lighting setup as much as possible for all of the coverage. Like, I'd want to get a lighting setup that's going to work for every single shot. It's a pain in the ass sometimes, but it keeps the momentum going in a really, really powerful way, and it keeps the energy up on set in a really powerful way. And those are all things that I've kind of pulled from Lawrence Sher.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes you get a director who goes like, okay, let's light for the wide, and let's do the wide, and then we're going to go in and then we're going to change the lighting setup. And then it's like, oh, well, we got to go back to the wide. It's like, well, fuck. Like, what? What do you mean we got to go back to the wide?
There are horror stories.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. So it's kind of funny because
a good first AD like Cameron Thorpe.
I know. No, but it's just sometimes it's like and I mean I guess not necessarily do I blame first time directors for this, but like obviously the experienced directors are always thinking about their schedule and like what they should do to maximize their efficiency on set. And I mean, the first AD is meant to obviously take that away from their creative brain so that they can focus on the performance and where the camera goes and their collaboration with the actors and the cinematographer. But sometimes you get that. And I mean, like, this is an awesome ambition for you because, or desire for you, because if you were able to do that, then your lighting setup would be like where it is. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't move, then, and that happens, then you don't really lose much time. You might have to make some minor adjustments, obviously, depending on where the sun is, if you're outside, or, there's a lot of variables. But yeah, that's a great way of talking about it, I think. Thank you very much for that. I think that from what I've seen you do, not just in the realm of like short films or music videos or commercials, but also in the realm of photography and what you post on Instagram. Mm-hmm. I feel like from my perspective, it does look like from an outside view that you're kind of shaping your own craft and style around, I think what Larry Sher has done in Joker, whether that's directly influenced you or not. I think that everybody, I mean, I would be lying if I said that Joker didn't influence me. Mm-hmm. But I mean, then again, I think it's also true that Joker influencing you is different than Larry Sher influencing you, because Joker's not the only thing he's ever done. But anyways, we got the image up here. Can you see it?
I can see it. And it is honestly so funny that this would be the image that you chose, considering this is, in the sequence of the film, that this frame happens to come right after the frame I chose. It's such a ridiculous coincidence that we both chose these.
It is ridiculous. And I mean, we talked about like picking our own frames. And the only clue that you gave me was that your choice is not in the 80 frames that I sent you.
And you know what's so funny? When I told you that, I was actually going to choose a different frame. I wasn't even looking at that frame.
Yeah, so there you go. So this was definitely by accident. It's an amazing coincidence. So yeah, let's talk about this frame really briefly, and then obviously, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up. So this is the image that I brought to the table today, which is, it's interesting. Like, I mean, it's interesting that we both kind of brought a wide shot. I know one of the other shots that you brought was a more of a, I can't remember if it was a close-up or a medium, but
yeah, it's a bit more of a medium.
Bit more of a medium. I find that very interesting just because of what you said to me recently about wides. You don't like them?
Yeah, I mean, they're just such a pain in the ass to shoot. I mean, you know what? To be fair, a huge part of that is just the low budget world, and my own sort of perfectionist outlook. I'm like, oh, fuck, this would be so good if I just had this one thing that there's no way we could have the budget for.
That we could get.
Exactly, right? So, and you know what, even my own sort of aesthetic tastes in terms of like the way I tend to cover scenes, the way I tend to break down my own coverage, I don't usually include a wide shot outside of just the sake of having the coverage. In my head, I try and plan a shoot around having a lot of closer sort of intimate mediums, close-ups, and I tend to just keep the wide as an insurance policy.
Right, which is interesting because I listened to a podcast recently called Just Shoot It that featured the cinematographer for End of the Fucking World, and he talked about like not shooting wides at all for that show. And
oh, really?
Like, yeah, and or it might have been so. I've seen the first season, but not the second season, so I don't know necessarily if that applies. Like, there wasn't an overabundance of wides in the second season, right?
It's been a while since I watched it, but if I remember correctly, I don't think there are a ton.
Yeah, because so it's interesting. They talked about the relationship with the studio and the relationship with Netflix. Like, Netflix doesn't really impede upon the flow, but like certain studios would be like, okay, you have to get an establisher. Because you have to. It's like, where the fuck is my character? It's like some producer sitting behind a desk being like, how do we know where the fuck the character is? Where's the geography of the scene? It's like, shut the fuck up. Okay, this is intentional. But anyways, it's just interesting that we both brought a wide to the table. And I mean, that's a good point about low budget. This film was $55 million. That's how much the film cost, which is interesting. That is low budget in like the Hollywood standards. But
yeah, I mean, in the realm of like comic book movies, I mean, 55 million is dirt.
Is like 10 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, out of an 85-day schedule. Yeah.
Yeah, in this Marvel DC kind of realm, this is definitely the low budget indie film.
Yeah, so I love wides. Now, with that said, I love them. Okay. Now, I think it's because they can tell you so much about the character. And the last frame that we looked at is an example of that. And I'm going to use this frame as a way to talk about the lamp that is present in the last scene, because something that you said was interesting. It's like, we're sitting here breaking that down, but how do we know that Larry Sher was like, yeah, we're just going to put it there because it casts a little bit of light on the brick and it'll be cool, you know? So, so like, but this is the shot that comes directly after the one where he's ascending the stairs. And in this case, he's moving from left to right. He's going down the hill, but ultimately he's walking towards this source of illumination, which is above the archway. So I want to talk about that in this scene. Not so much the composition, but the composition also like definitely plays into it. But from the perspective, in terms of composition, the perspective, like how we want to look at it is the perspective that he's walking towards this light, not away from it. He's making a natural progression from left to right. Okay. We've seen movies in the past, like The Graduate, for example, which has that opening sequence where the main character is progressing from right to left, which is not a natural progression, which is a standard way of showing that this character is moving backwards. But Arthur, a character who's struggling internally, is progressing. He's descending in his motion, but ascending in terms of moving from left to right and towards this lamp. So, Robin, what do you think we can take away from that? Like, just this in terms of his relationship to this source of illumination.
Well, I think that it's very interesting that we would have both chosen frames that are communicating a lot of the same information. I think the color is first and foremost one of the most important aspects of these lights, because that's a constant pattern that gets returned to within the language of this film. So the yellow definitely is something that's pulling Arthur out of the sort of blue, the blue city, the blue threats that kind of constantly push him down, make him feel isolated. So there's something to be said about it being a beacon in the dark, a beacon in the blue. And there's something to be said about him moving out of the blue towards it, because it is sort of, even though it is this sickly yellow, it is also a source of warmth in all the cold as well. So it's him moving towards something better. And also, just not to get us too off track, but just to defend the wide shot situation for this film, shooting on the Alexa 65, having that large format sensor definitely gives you a whole new dynamic to work with in terms of your wide shots. When you're throwing a 50 millimeter lens on and you're getting the same kind of frame as a approximately like a 25 millimeter.
A 25 or 26.
Yeah, exactly. So, you can get that beautiful depth of field that you're getting with a 50 millimeter, but then with the field of view of a 25, 26. So
of a 24.
Exactly. So I do got to defend the wide shots of this film, because they have that large format sensor really kind of bolstering them and making them look a lot better than what you're going to get out of that 35 millimeter sensor. But yeah, in terms of that light pulling him towards some warmth, and it's a visual motif that they come back to constantly throughout the film.
Constantly, and from to my memory, like he turns into that archway.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe because this is his apartment building.
Yeah,
he's moving in, and you're moving into an apartment where. I guess this would be the important point to start talking about what's on either side, because, as soon as you get into the apartment, you move into a whole different visual world. Everything becomes very handheld. You get into these sort of wider lenses that let you keep the camera closer to Arthur. It becomes a much safer, intimate, warm world. As soon as you're in the apartment, it's all lit by these yellowy, warm lamps. He's with his mother, the one figure that kind of, at least in the beginning of the film, is to overuse this word, his beacon, his light in the dark. Yeah. So I think there's something to be said about him moving towards it and moving into the place that feels the safest to him.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because not only is Arthur as a character safer, but we as the audience feel safer. Because we're watching Arthur move through these wide shots in such a cold composition, and then all of a sudden he's in a safe house, right? He's in his apartment with his mother, the closest person to him in his life, and the tone of the images changes from from this overbearing cold image to an overbearing warm one, which is what you're talking about. Now it's also interesting because there's more light in this shot. Through the archway, there's another light, because I don't believe that the light that's on the outside of the archway could cast light onto the floor beyond the archway and in front of the
No, there's another one, over that other door.
So there's another light going on here. Whether it's a setup or another one of these lights on the other side of the archway, I'm not totally sure. But I think there's there's got to be some sort of big setup, in, either behind the camera or like behind this wall, shaping where the light lands on the floor.
I believe, if I remember correctly, as he walks through this frame, because I don't think this is a static frame. I think it moves with him. I think it trucks to the side, and I believe that you reveal another one of these sort of sickly yellow lights above. So I think this is mostly practicals.
Mostly practicals. All right. Yeah. Yeah, and another very interesting frame. It's it's lopsided in a lot of ways. Where this telephone pole lands, the horizon of the top, the top portion, the lines above the archway, the street, the sidewalk, kind of like lopsiding downwards on an angle. Really, like diagonal lines kind of shape this composition for me. Like with the placement of the blinds in the window of the apartment building to the left of the frame, left middle. Really, it's diagonal lines, and he's transitioning. Like, we're obviously moving with this character, but the character is moving through a space that is not linear but straight. And so I think that also says a lot about Arthur Fleck as a character and kind of where we are, because it's like, it's like you look at this as a producer and a cinematographer, and it's like, is the camera level? Like, what the fuck is going on? Is the camera like straight?
Well, exactly. This frame is so disorienting.
Wait a minute. The street
is it is not level at all.
Like, the longer
if you look
at
that
it,
building and follow those windows up, this is not a level shot. And I think that is a completely intentional choice. This feels like someone who is in a very confusing. You mentioned the light post there, and the telephone pole. Yeah. All of these lines are intersecting at completely different angles. Nothing feels uniform about it. Oh yeah. And I think that feels like a very intentional choice to kind of lose this character in a bit of a mad world.
Yeah, and so I think that's kind of where we'll sum it up by saying that composition really is used in a strong way to evoke what is going on in the psyche of this character, because it really is a psychological study. It's a character piece that's brilliantly crafted. From inciting incident to climax and ending, the film is a contemporary slow dance number in every way, rhythmically timed and paced to music that is sometimes only subtly present. And that's the Joker, ladies and gentlemen. I think that there's a lot going on in so many of these frames, and we could talk forever about the framework that's going on in this film, and that's the purpose of this podcast. Robin, I've got a really important question for you. Mm-hmm. Will you do another episode with us?
Absolutely. I've had a ton of fun talking with you, Cam. I mean, we always have fun talking, and I know that we could talk for hours about these frames. So I'd be happy to come back.
I think we should. I'm gonna have a few. Obviously, I have a few guests lined up. I want to obviously do Kevin for the next episode. Whoa! Hey, Kevin. Shout out to my buddy Kevin Reus, who's a huge talent, and you should check out the main channel, Red Curtain Entertainment, and his vlog channel, Dr. Masaki. He also does some collaborations with the box office artists, so take a look at that as well. We are uploading to Red Curtain Entertainment Podcast. It is brought to you by Red Curtain Entertainment and filmed in part in the RCU studios north of Toronto, following COVID-19 guidelines.
Yes, we literally have a
piece of plexiglass
barrier between us.
So, we have a plexiglass barrier, and then like when this is all said and done, Kevin and I just go and make out for a while. Anyways.
No.
Will that make it into the video?
I'm
Because
trying
I would like to see
poison
that.
you. Sorry?
Is that going to make it into this video? Because I would very much like to see that.
It's possible. I don't know.
Oh, jeez. Cameron's going to edit this.
I think so. That's kind of where we'll bring our study of the film Joker to a close. Not to say that we won't ever revisit this film, because you can always talk about Joker. I think it's also interesting to note that we haven't said already is that we are looking at this film almost exactly a year after its release, which is interesting because Robin and I would prefer to break down a film almost immediately after we've seen it. However, we are bringing different perspectives on this film because of the time between seeing it for the first time and talking about it. So I think that's very interesting and something to think about when you're talking about films, which we encourage you to do, so long as you get them legally. So, Kevin, what's your favorite film?
Many films. Actually, what one that comes to mind is Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
So next time on Framework, we're going to look at Scott Pilgrim versus the World with Kevin Reus, the owner of Red Crane Entertainment, and discuss its impact on the eyes as well as on cultures around it. So that'll be fun. That's gonna be exciting. Robin, although he's got a really sexy baritone voice, is not going to be on that episode. But he'll come back.
I can be if you want. But
I mean, you can be. I mean, you've seen that film?
Yes, I've seen that film.
Yeah, so there you go. Maybe we'll bring you back and we'll talk about Scott Pilgrim. Robin, before we close the show, I just want to ask you, what are you working on today? You got any projects on the go? Things that you want to talk about or that you can talk about?
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting. We're recording this at a very bizarre time in the world. Obviously the backdrop of all of this is the COVID-19 pandemic. So there are not a ton of things going on, unfortunately, but the one that I'd really like to push is a little self-indulgent for this podcast, but it's Run Boy Run. It's a short film that Cameron, you and I worked on, shot almost exactly a year ago. Pretty sure it'll be a year exactly in like 2 days. So
tomorrow,
yeah. So
2 days, exactly 2 days.
So you know what? I just want people to keep their eyes out for Run Boy Run. It's it's a labor of love, and I can't wait for people to see it and enjoy it.
Awesome. And just to remind our audience who may have tuned in halfway through or whatever, Robin, your Instagram, robin.johnston.dp, is that correct?
That is correct. Yep, you can find me there. You can also find my demo reel on Vimeo, but Instagram is the main hub of my my communication and posting.
Awesome. Well, I cannot wait to see where your career goes and how it goes. Thank you so much, Robin, for joining us today. Have a great one, everybody. Stay safe and keep watching. If you have any recommendations for the show, please email rcepodcasts@gmail.com. Information in the description. Fuck. Cue music. See ya.
Thanks so much for having me, Cam.
No problem. All right. Take care.
Take care.